welcome back for another week. I've been gone for the last week up in the mountains, and I can see that a lot has changed since I've been gone. So this canola is really starting to mature here now. When you pull up these plants, that main stem is really starting to turn. So we got good color change going on in there, but a lot of these side branches are still very green and immature, and we're going to be letting this mature to the point where it's going to be straight cut anyways. So we're still a ways away from desiccation timing in here yet. But quicker than you think, especially if we get more hot weather. We did get a little bit of rain here over the weekend. I believe Sunday we got about 1/4 inch, so just enough to shut things down for the day. Well, the dryland durum has come along pretty well in the last week. You can see these main heads are basically hard dough and ripening, so a lot of them are very, very firm now. So we're definitely at swath timing on this, and a lot of these little green tiller heads haven't even flowered yet, so they are still completely empty. Oh no, that one actually had a little bit of milk in it, but not much. So we're pretty much ready to do a pre-harvest in here. Well, a lot of my irrigated barley has been swathed this week, so not much to look at here. Just have to wait for it to dry down. Well, a lot of the irrigated wheat is basically ripening or in hard dough stage, depending on where you are in the field, and wherever there's a little bit of excess moisture, we're still a bit green, so we have a little while longer to wait for this yet. Well, as the crop develops, you can see there is more sawfly damage showing up. You can see some of this wheat here laying on the ground when you cut these stems. They're full of sawdust, so sawflies are still doing their work in here, and so are some grasshoppers. Well, here's my canola field that has a grasshopper problem along the headlands, and it did get sprayed about a week ago with silencer, which did a pretty decent job of cleaning up the grasshopper numbers. But there is still quite a few in here. You can really see some of the damage on these pods here along the edge, and when you get closer to the edge, some of these plants are just completely chewed right off. The ground is just absolutely covered with dead grasshoppers here, but they are already starting to move in off the pasture lands over there, so numbers already are coming back up again. But at this point, it's not going to be too long before this canola is mature enough that they're not going to be able to feed on those pods anymore, particularly on the main stem where they're really starting to ripen up. But they may still be feeding on the lower stem and some of these side branches and cleaning off anything that's still green. So I'll have to keep an eye on them. As long as it's just along the headlands, it's not that serious of a problem, as long as they stay out of the majority of the field. Well, the irrigated canola is really starting to turn, starting to see some bits of color out here now. So when we pull up these plants and we isolate the main stem should pretty much be almost completely colored now, which this one indeed does look to be. So that one is pretty much turned right to the top, but some of these side branches are still pretty green. So these are going to need a little bit more time before we're at that pre-harvest stage timing for Reglone or heat and glyphosate. But we're starting to get close, some of these patches, although of course there is still some very green areas out in a field like this as well. Well, the safflower has definitely progressed a fair bit since I was last here 2 weeks ago. So you can still see we do have some open flowers here, but the vast majority of it has finished flowering and will now be going into seed development. Well, here this wheat field got silaged off about 2 weeks ago, and it has been reseeded into winter wheat, which is already starting to emerge. Now this is pretty early in the year for winter wheat at the beginning of August to be coming out of the ground, but if you want fall forage to be grazed, it's not a bad option. You can graze it as long as you don't really overdo it and still basically get a cereal crop out of it the next year. Well, down here by McGrath, you can see some of the combines are out. Of course, nobody's going right now because it's a little bit too wet. But lentils are coming off and looks like they're doing a pretty good job overall. Well, here's how the lentils look after being Reglone. So it is kind of a short, thin crop compared to last year because of the drought and the heat. But overall, not too terribly bad. You can see you got to cut pretty low to get all these pods, but it seems like they're managing it pretty well so far. Yields in the 20-ish area. Well, I can see the sawfly down here by McGrath has been busy since I've been gone the last 2 weeks. There is now quite a few stems are leaning over and on the ground. They have been nicely chopped off at the base, so especially around the headlands. There is quite a bit, so I'm going to definitely recommend this crop get swathed. It's basically, you know, we're averaging in hard dough stage here into ripening, so it is about time for it to get swathed anyways, and we might lose, you know, 10% of the heads or so if we don't. Well, here we have some Invigor canola that is very, very close to pre-harvest timing. There's still some green areas you can't quite see over there, kind of in a bottom spot in the hill there. That's going to need a few more days yet, but the vast majority of this field is pretty much ready to go. Typical in vigor fashion. The bottom of the plants are still quite green. We even have leaves and a little bit of new growth starting down here. Meanwhile, the upper pods, even on these side branches, are pretty much completely mature, and we have really good color change. We're probably at about 80% total color change in total. There's still a few side branches with a little bit of green in them here and there, but for the most part we are fairly mature. Here's another field of Invigor canola. This is 233P on dryland, and it is turning pretty well and fairly evenly, and part of that is because it has a very, very heavy level of blackleg in it. So you can see I just grabbed these 4 plants here, and all of them are pretty heavily infected with blackleg. So let's take some sections of them and see what they look like inside. This guy here is definitely a severity of a 5, completely dead. Yeah, this one pretty much a 4 or 5. That one completely dead through the center. So not uncommon to see this time of the year. Well, up here by Carmen Gay, it's another nice warm windy day. The barley is ripening quite nicely. There's still the odd green tiller in it here and there, but for the most part it's getting pretty close to being combinable. It is definitely getting dry and ripening, so should be in here in not too terribly long. The canola, we still got some pretty green areas here. It's not quite ready for something like a Regulon application, but it could be swath. But you'll see a lot of this newer green growth after those showers a couple weeks ago has pretty much burned off and really hasn't done anything at all. So that's kind of nice to see, because we won't have to wait for it, and it wouldn't have mounted to anything anyways. Main stems are all pretty well turned and looking pretty good in here. So yield is not going to be fantastic, but we'll take what we can get. Well, out here by Colehurst, the irrigated canola is still looking pretty green, but when you get in here and you start digging around, you can find some of the main stems are really starting to show a bit of color change here now. So let's grab this guy, take a look here. So here's our main stem, kind of short and stubby, but you can see pods are green, but seeds are turning inside. So we do have some pretty good color change on this guy here, although I'm pretty sure these side branches are going to be still pretty green and soft, which they are. So we still have longer to wait on a field like this before we can get to pre-harvest timing yet. Well, I'm back at that barley field just off the west side of Lethbridge that had horrible grasshoppers here on the headlands. The field has now been harvested last week. Farmer tells me that the grasshoppers were pretty bad around the headlands, but once he got into the field, 1 or 2 passes, it cleaned up and was pretty good. So that tells me the coragen definitely did its job. And here along the edge of the field, you can see these hungry grasshoppers have continued working on the kochia, and many of it has been stripped right down to skeletons now. So that is quite interesting. It seems like kochia really is not a preferred food source. And next door, this wheat, between the sawfly and the grasshoppers, you can see there is really very little left. Well, this corn by Lethbridge, this is the Pioneer 58 AM series, is now tasseling and silking and is much more than 1 lisle tall. It is pretty good and tall now, and you can see we got some pretty good silk formation going on here. This one's just starting to get fertilized. This one's already done, but yeah, it's starting to catch up to some of the earlier varieties now and looking very impressive. Well, here by Lethbridge, where some silage barley came off about 2 weeks ago, we have been reseeded into corn. So this is a grazing style corn, or cobless corn, sometimes it's called. And you can see they've come up real nice and they're doing really well. So these guys will probably never get to the point of ear formation, but they will still be able to produce several tons to the acre of quality silage later on in the season. So hopefully these guys get going, and we'll see them in a couple weeks. They'll look a lot different. Well, here by Lethbridge, this shorter season corn is developing really rapidly. It's a little shorter and spindlier than the longer season corn like the 58 AM, but it is pretty much completely finished silking now. So these silks are nice and dry. And when you break these ears apart, you can see we got some pretty good kernel formation going on in here. These ears are looking pretty good, and they're still very, very milky, so they're hardly building up solids yet at all. But it won't be too long before we start to see a lot more starches built up in these. Well, it's getting to be that time of the year again. Combines are at it. We're out in the pea field here right now. These peas are coming off. I'm hearing yields in the 20s. So yeah, time to fly the drone, and you might see a few drone videos yet this fall. Oh, my old college professor always used to tell me a good crop of canola, you could throw a cat in it and the cat would be able to walk across the top. And unfortunately, I don't have a cat with me today, but I do have Fen. So let's see if he can get across. Come on, Fen, let's go. Come on, hup. Come on, let's go. Come on. Come on, let's go. Come on. Come on. Come on, let's go. Come on. All right, well, I guess he can't walk on top, and he doesn't particularly seem to want to jump over it either. Lazy boy. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.